Hey guys, what's up? It's Eric at Advanced Level Automotive. Before I start today's video, I just want to take a minute to say thank you guys for all of those who support the channel and for what it is I do. I know I really haven't been making as many videos lately as I wish I could. I run a full-time shop, so it's kind of hard for me to you know, work on the cars and try to film at the same time, and while I'm dealing with customers and dealing with employees. So I'm really going to try to make it a priority this year to bring you guys good content on the regular, useful content. You know, I want to bring you guys stuff that you guys can apply to your own workplace, or if you're a DIY person, you know, hopefully you can apply something that I'm sharing with you guys. Anyways, I just wanted to say thank you guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for the video. Thanks. Alright, so I just had this vehicle towed in. You can already guess what kind of vehicle this is. This is a 2012 Mini Cooper Countryman. Yeah, it's a Countryman. So yeah, anyways, the problem with this vehicle is that it is a no start. Customer said that while they were driving it, the car shut off on them and they weren't able to restart it. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick the key into the slot. If I can get it in there. And then I'm gonna put my foot on the brake. I'm gonna hit the start button. Alright, engine cranks but does not start. So first of all, one of the things I like to do is make sure that the check engine light is illuminating. That does show us that the computer is at least communicating. And then also, I like to check to see if the RPM needle is moving while I'm cranking it. That gives us an indication that the crank sensor is reading. So let me crank it again. Let's take a peek at that needle. Alright, so as you can see, it did move a little bit, so that is an indication that the crank sensor is reading. So the next thing I want to do is just scan for codes. I'm going to go ahead and scan it. I've already ran the scanner on this, and of course there's no fault codes detected, so there's no help there. So there's a few ways we can attack this with no fault codes. We really don't have, you know, any guidance. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with the old school method and just check for the basics. What do we need for the engine to start? We need spark, we need fuel, and we need air. So let's go under the hood and let's see what quick checks we can do. Alright, so we're under the hood of the vehicle now. I've got my little makeshift jump pack hooked up to the battery. Battery was getting kind of low. So I guess initially what I want to do is do some basic checks. We can check for fuel pressure, we can check for spark. Seems like the two are pretty easy to do. On the fuel rail, there's a little service port, so we can hook up a fuel gauge there, check to see if we have fuel pressure. We can take this little cover off and check to see if we have spark on the coil. So I think I'm going to go ahead and try the fuel pressure first. It seems easy enough to get to, and while I'm at it, we'll just take this cover off. Alright, so I got my little fuel pressure tester. Go ahead and take the little cap off of this thing. It's kind of a tight spot. There we go, there's the cap. And I think this is the right size, so I'm going to try that. I've already got fuel coming out, so I'm pretty sure the fuel pressure is good. Let me get that screwed on there. I'm gonna need two hands for this, so let me put the phone down. Alright, so I got it hooked up. I'm gonna go ahead and crank the engine over, see if we got fuel pressure. Go. Let's check and see if we got fuel pressure. Alright, so as you can see on the gauge, we got at least 40 pounds of pressure. So I don't think that's a problem. Let's go ahead and take this cover off and check for spark. Alright, for me the second quickest check that we can do is I'm just going to use a lab scope. And this is pretty straightforward. I mean, these coils have 3 wires on them, but if you know anything about the BMWs, they essentially work a lot like the 2-wire Ford coils. In which the transistor is built into the computer. Transistor is not built into the coil. The third wire that you see, which is the black wire, is just a shared ground for all of these coils. And the one that we're looking for is the wire that is always a different color. So if you look over here, we have the black and green, black and green, and black and green. The one wire that always changes color is this one. So it's white here, blue, yellow, and orange. We know that's going to be the primary circuit control on this coil. So we're going to go ahead and crank the engine over and see if we have a pattern. Alright, I know it might be difficult to see, but we're going to go ahead and crank the engine over. Crank it. All right, hold it. All right, so looking at this waveform, we can see the computer is controlling the coil to come on, but I don't see any large kV spikes. So let me check the feed, the primary feed on that circuit. All right, so we're on the primary side. As you can see, the battery voltage is getting a little bit low. We're at 11.14 volts, but it is a flat line. Go ahead and crank it. All right, hold it. And we should not be seeing that on the primary side. All right, guys, so before we go any further, I just wanted to take a minute to talk about what it is I was looking for on the lab scope. If you recall, I did explain that this type of coil had the transistor or the driver built into the engine computer. It was not built into the coil. The nice thing about this type of design coil is that we can actually look at the secondary ignition waveform pattern through the primary circuit. If you've ever worked on distributor ignition systems, then you might be familiar with secondary ignition waveform patterns. And the nice thing is on this type of coil design, we can actually see that through the primary circuit. So what I did was hooked up my lead to the control wire. If you recall, that was the wire that was a different color at each coil. That control wire is going to be where you would find the secondary ignition waveform pattern. So if you look at my drawing here, I kind of drew this up a little crudely, but this pretty much explains what it is I'm looking for, and it's pretty straightforward. Over here on this side, you're going to see that we have system voltage, and it's going to maintain system voltage until the computer decides to ground the circuit. When the computer grounds the circuit, we'll have it go down to around 0 volts, and it's going to hold it, and this is going to be the dwell time, what they call the dwell time. And when the computer lets go of that ground, we're going to have this big voltage spike, right? This is called the firing line, and the firing line is going to indicate that we do have ignition coil buildup and that the coil is actually firing. This right here is called the spark line, and this spark line is going to tell us a lot about the spark that's jumping the gap in the spark plug. So without having to pull the coil out and physically checking for spark, we can simply hook up the lab scope and look for this pattern. So if we see that we don't have a spark line, or we don't even have a firing line, then we know that we don't have spark. The other thing would be is if we didn't have this drop right here in voltage, then we know the computer is not even commanding the coil to fire. So this pattern can give us a direction in which way we want to go. So for instance, if we saw that the computer was not grounding the circuit, we knew that the computer was not even commanding the coil to fire, well then we're going to be looking for an input problem. We're going to be looking for maybe a cam sensor or a crank sensor issue, something like that. The other problem would be is if we didn't have this firing line. If we didn't have this firing line, then we know that we're not really getting sufficient voltage to the ignition coils. Or if we didn't have the spark line, then we know that we might have a problem with the spark plug or the secondary ignition, which in this case it's direct coil, so you know we would probably have an issue with the coil boot or the spark plug. So just looking at this ignition waveform pattern can tell us a whole lot. Now if you recall, when I connected the lab scope, we did not have this firing line. We did show the 12 volts, but then when the computer would ground it, it would go down to 0, and then the computer would let go, but we would not get this firing line. We would just go back to the normal 12 volts. Well then at that point, I knew that we needed to check the power feed input to the coil. So on the power feed side, which is the power feed for all of the coils, we should always have system voltage. In our case, the power feed side was completely dropping out every time the computer was grounding it. So we knew that we had a problem with high resistance in the power feed getting to the ignition coils. So hopefully that makes sense. All right guys, so moving over to the wiring diagram, I've got Mitchell pulled up over here. And if you look, we have the ignition coils down here. So you'll see coil 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you look closely, you'll see that these coils are 3-wire coils. So they have 3 wires each. But if you're familiar with BMW and Mini Cooper, you'll know that these 3-wire coils that they use, they actually work a lot like your typical Ford coil that has 2 wires. And what I mean by that is that the driver or the transistor for the coil is not built into the coil. It's actually built into the PCM or the engine computer, or as BMW and Mini Cooper call it, is a DME, digital motor electronics. So whatever they call it, the engine computer, that's what controls the ignition coil. So if you look over here, we have the green wire, which is pin number 3 on all of these coils. That's going to be our shared power feed. This is a constant power feed to each of the coils. And if you look at pin 1, which is going to be the wire that's always going to be a different color at each coil, that's going to be the control side of the coil. These go back to the engine computer, and the engine computer grounds these in order to generate a spark. If you look at this last wire, it's a black wire. This is actually a shared ground, but we're not going to worry about that wire. So if you recall, when we had the lab scope hooked up, we did notice that we had power dropping on this green wire, which is going to be the main power feed. So we should never see voltage dropping on this excessively on the green wire. This should always have system voltage or close to. You'll see a small drop in voltage whenever the coil gets grounded, but you won't see much of a drop. We are seeing this completely drop out. So what we need to do is we want to trace this wire back, and we want to see where this power comes from, because I'm pretty sure there's a fuse somewhere in this circuit. Let's go ahead and move over to the next page. If you notice, this green wire is number 5. We'll move over to the next page and we'll continue number 5 over here. So if I zoom in, move this down here, you'll see number 5, green wire. Let's go ahead and follow it up. See, it goes over here to number 1. So let's go to the next page. Let's find number 1. It is this green wire right here, and if we follow it back here, we see it goes to the engine computer. If I move this down, you'll see that it says DME control unit. That is the engine computer. So if we come back up here, we'll see that at terminal 15 is where we get our power from the engine computer to this leg of the circuit. So there should be a fuse that feeds this power feed right here. We're not showing it on this diagram, but there should be a fuse that's a direct input for this power right here, because this circuit has to have a fuse. Almost every ignition coil setup power feed should have some type of fuse in the circuit, but I'm not seeing it drawn up on this wiring diagram. Let me try digging through some other wiring diagrams and see if I can find it. Alright guys, so over here on the wall I've got the OEM wiring diagram. I printed this up from AllData. It's actually on 6 different pages, which I don't know why they do that, especially considering this is such a simple circuit. But anyways, I had to print up 6 separate pages, and then I had to just staple them together. So if you look over here, you'll see the ignition coil number 1, ignition coil number 2, ignition coil number 3, and ignition coil number 4. Down here is the DME, which is the engine computer. And if you look at pin 5, this is going to be the power feed that comes out of the engine computer. So power feed to all of the coils on this green wire. Now this power feed on the Mitchell diagram did not show us where the power feed came from. And like I said, I was pretty sure there had to be a fuse that fed the power to the PCM, or excuse me, the DME in this case, to provide power for the coils. So if we follow this back over here, you'll see that this goes to a relay, and this relay gets its power from this fuse. So this 15 amp fuse right here, which is number 30, is the power feed for the ignition coils. So this wasn't on the Mitchell wiring diagram, but it is on this diagram. So I think the first thing we need to do is go ahead and check this fuse. All right, so back under the vehicle, here is the 15 amp fuse right here. If you look on this cover, it's 15 amp fuse. And I'm just gonna go ahead and use my test light. I have it connected to the battery ground, and I'm gonna touch both sides. Excuse me. It's one side and then the other side. As you can see, this fuse is working properly. Alright guys, so now that we've checked the 15 amp fuse, we know that we do not have a problem here. The fuse is good. Now we just need to figure out where we do have a problem. Somewhere in the circuit we have high resistance. And as far as the list of possibilities, it could be pretty long. Number 1, we could have a problem with the computer. You know, it's possible that we could be getting a good strong power feed into the computer, but we're getting a weak power feed out of the computer. The other possibility would be that we do have a good power feed coming out of the computer, but somewhere in the wiring harness between the computer and the ignition coils, we have high resistance in that wiring. That's a high possibility because everything over here is actually pretty close to each other. This wire right here that comes out of the computer has to travel across the engine bay to the ignition coil. So there is a possibility that we could have a problem where the wire is either pinched or chafed, or we have some type of high resistance in that wire. So that's a high possibility there. The other possibility could be that we could have a bad relay. So that's another possibility. We just need to start doing some pinpoint checking. So I think what I want to do is I want to go to pin 5 at the computer. I want to check to see if we got a good power feed coming out of here. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to put the lab scope on it. We're going to crank the engine over, and we're going to see if we have the power feed drop out on this pin. All right, so we're here at the computer. I've already identified pin number 5, which is this green wire right here. I've got my piercing probe on there. and we got the lab scope hooked up. I'm in a graphing mode, so we're just going to check to see if we see the voltage drop on this side of the circuit. Go ahead and turn the key on. All right, we see our system voltage. Go ahead and crank it. Hold it. All right, and as you can see, our voltage is dropping on this side of the circuit. All right, so now that we know that here at pin 5, we're still having the voltage drop out when we're cranking the engine, let's move over to pin 1 and check to see if we see the same thing there. All right, so here we are again at the computer. I've identified the red and green wire, pin number 1 on this connector here. That is the power feed from the junction box to the computer. Again, we're in a graphing mode. As you can see, we have system voltage. All right, guys, I apologize. I did go to check pin 1 at the computer, but my camera died when I was trying to film it. But when I did check it here, we also had high resistance. And what I mean by that is we saw the same thing on pin 1 that we saw on pin 5. So I think the next thing is we're gonna go ahead and jump to the relay and check to see if this relay is the problem. All right, so the only irritating thing that I'm running into is that I really can't find a diagram or anything that tells me which relay it is that we should be looking for. So I guess what I'm gonna do, I'm not really sure if I recommend doing this, but it's the only option I have right now. I'm gonna start disconnecting relays while I'm watching the power on this pin 1 on the ECM. So let me go ahead and start disconnecting these relays, and we're gonna wait to see if we can find the one that's feeding the power to this. So when we see the power drop out, we'll know we're on the right relay. So pull this one out. That did nothing. Let's put it back in. It's gonna kind of go down the line here. Pull this one out. Nope, not changing. Put it back in. Pull this one out. It's not doing anything. Put it back in. Try this one here. Pull it, and there we go. Yeah, so I just pulled this relay out right here. If you look at it, it's located right here. Put it back in. So relay located right here is the one that we're looking for. So that relay is going to be the one that feeds the power to here. I'm going to go ahead and use this relay tester kit that I got. I got it from Mac Tools. It's actually made by Lyle. I don't know if there's a part number on here. You don't have to buy this from Mac Tools. In fact, it's actually cheaper if you buy it from Lyle, and you can get it on Amazon for a lot cheaper than what I got it on the Mac truck. It comes with these neat little pliers, some jumpers, and of course the relay jumpers. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the relay back out, identify which one we have. It's the 5-pin, which is this one, I believe. Yep, this one right here. So we're going to go ahead and plug this one in place. Got that in there. Let's go ahead and pop the relay in. Alright, so let me back up a little bit. I went ahead and pulled the relay back off of the jumper, and I got my power probe here, and what we're going to do is we're going to identify which 2 pins are the powers. So if you know anything about relays, you should have 2 powers, one for the control side and the other one for the switching side. So I'm going to touch this. That's our power there. Touch this one. You can see that's a ground. This one is nothing. There's our other power right there, and then this one is a ground. So more than likely, I believe this middle pin right here is going to be the power going out to the computer. So right now it's a ground when I touch it, but it should turn into a power when I put the relay back in. If it does, then we are correct. So let's put this back in right here, and let me touch that pin. Alright, as you can see, it's a power now. So definitely we know that this pin is the feed for the computer. I'm gonna go ahead and jump this relay, and we're gonna see if we can get the vehicle to start. Alright, so the kit comes with this nifty little jumper wire. I'm gonna go ahead and hook up one side, go over and hook up the other side, and then we're gonna try to start the vehicle. Inside the vehicle, got the key, put it in. and voila, the car starts and runs. So let's go ahead and order a relay for this thing and put one in. Alright guys, so before I end today's video, I just want to take a minute to stop and talk about the importance of having some type of lab scope or some type of graphing meter, and how critical having this tool was in diagnosing this vehicle today. So this right here I have is a Vantage Pro. This is just a very simple lab scope, 2-channel. This thing, you can buy it secondhand, really cheap. I bought this one like 7 years ago off of some dude on Craigslist for like 600 bucks. I mean, this thing, it has not even been updated. I mean, it looks like the latest year it goes up to is 2006. It is currently 2019, so the update in this thing, I never even bothered to get it updated because honestly, these presets, I don't need them. I own it because of the graphing meter and because of the lab scope. So having some type of graphing meter or some type of lab scope is really important, especially when you have troubled vehicles like this, because the problem with using something like a digital multimeter, and to be honest with you, I don't even own a DVOM. Like this right here, I got it off of my brother's tool cart, so it's not even mine. I mean, I don't even own one because it's just so simple for me to just take this out, and if I want to just use a basic multimeter, I can just go to the multimeter up here and use it as a digital meter. But anyway, that's beside the point. Using a digital multimeter like this, the problem with it is that we probably would not have been able to catch the voltage drop on the power feed side of that ignition coil. And the reason why is because this digital multimeter is not fast enough to catch the drops in voltage that are happening whenever the coil is energizing. So we would have not been able to see the voltage drop on this digital meter. We would have just read the system voltage or whatever it was, and in that split second or the split few milliseconds, the power dropped on the feed side of the coil, we wouldn't have been able to see it. It would have just went right by us. So that's why it was so important and so critical to have some type of lab scope and some type of graphing meter. Like I said, you don't need to spend a lot of money. I have a lot of tools. I mean, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of tools. This lab scope, I've had it for like 7 years, and I've been using this one. I mean, I've owned another one also that was on my Varus, but that's beside the point. I never even liked using the one that was built into the scan tool because I kept having problems with it crashing. It would always freeze up, and I never liked it, so I ended up getting rid of that tool eventually. And I've just always stuck with this Vantage Pro. I mean, it's just it's very basic, it's very simple to use. And I know a lot of people are going to try to tell you, you know, you need to buy something like a Pico scope and spend thousands of dollars, and you know how so much better that tool is. But honestly, I've made money. I've fixed so many vehicles using just this very basic lab scope. And that's not to say that the Pico scope isn't a great scope. I mean, it is. You know, I'll probably eventually buy one, but right now I just don't think that I really need it that much. So I've always just used this Vantage Pro. I mean, I like it because it's portable, you know, it's fast, it's simple, it's easy to use, and I don't need to get too complicated with my setup. I like to keep things simple. I don't like to overcomplicate things because life is complicated enough. Anyways, I just wanted to put that out for you guys. You know, hopefully you guys are interested in getting some type of lab scope. This is something that, you know, I would definitely look at is just getting something like an older Vantage Pro, because especially if you're an entry-level person, you just want to get started using something. These, you can pick them up online or on Craigslist just cheap, and it doesn't matter whether or not the software is updated. Honestly, don't pay for a software update. It costs $1,000 to update the software on this thing. And I mean, honestly, if you know how to use it, you never need to use the presets that are built into it. And honestly, a lot of the information that's in here turns out to be wrong. I mean, it'll give you like pinout information, and then, you know, you go to the vehicle and it's not even the same. But anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit a thumbs up. If you enjoyed the channel, please subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, you can always comment down below, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Thanks.